Hello guys, Bn146 here. Welcome to today's video. So from the 15th to the 19th of July, I played in the President's Cup. It's a 9-round classical tournament. It's like the flagship annual tournament that National Chess Association holds every year. And so it's usually sponsored by certain international entities, and then we get very nice representation as well. So this year's tournament was no exception. We had players from the US, from Algeria, from Nigeria joining us. Very strong tournament. I decided to show you one game from the tournament. I decided to show this game because it was the game against the top seed and also the strongest player I'd ever played rating wise. And it was a fairly nice game, also quite instructive. So I thought I'd show it. So I'm playing on the black side here against candidate Master Waters Chase. He's from the United States. He came into the tournament as the top seed. But yeah, the tournament probably didn't go so well for him. Maybe he wasn't in form, but he had a very bad result. I think he withdrew from the tournament before the end even. So he started 1d4. And I played knight f6. And then he played bishop f4. Now, he has a few games online in the database that I'd used to prepare. So I did expect to go into some sort of London. And usually I play d5 against the London. He played e3. I went for an early c5. That's what I play against the London sometimes. And here he often takes. Now this is quite rare. Usually they play c3 and try and hold on to. Usually play this and they try and hold on to the pawn in the center. Then they do the usual London development around it. But he tends to take on c5 whenever he play. And again, as part of my preparation, I'd seen that he plays this way against the early c5, so I expected this much. And I prepared knight c6. I knew he went bishop b5. The point is that he's going to pin my knight and then attempt to hold on to this pawn on c4 with moves like b4 and then c3. So I prepared all this e6, then he played b4. I went a5 to hit at that structure. He played c3 to keep it all together. And then my preparation was to play bishop d7 here. Bishop d7, the point is to break the pin. That's freeing my knight to move. So that's now I am threatening to take on b4, right? So I mean, if he tries to protect with a3, then I can take on b4. And if the pawn takes back, my knight will take. And this pin on the a file is very important to many of my tactics in these positions. So if after say a3 I take and he decides now to snap off on c6, then he still faces the problem of this move b6. And in a lot of these structures, when white takes an extra pawn here on the c file, it happens a lot in with colors reversed in the Catalan. So you can imagine with on the white side of a Catalan, very often black takes on c4 and you have a pawn like this, and you go b3 to break up the structure, and it's very similar here. So you go b6 to just break up the structure. And because of this powerful dark square bishop, you're pretty much guaranteed to win the pawn back. So now you're threatening to just win the pawn back. And if they take, you take on b4 with check. And again, that pin here means he cannot take back. Very important. And if he does nothing, if he tries to protect the pawn, then I mean you take the pawn back. And if the pawn takes back, you have queen a5, and then you win the pawn back. So bishop d7 that's the idea, just to break the pin. And now the b4 pawn is kind of difficult to hold. So he played queen b3. And again, I'd seen that he goes for queen b3 in such structures from his games that I looked through in preparation. And I looked at a few lines that go from this point. And I'd seen that the top engine move here was knight h5. It's fairly, and which is what I played, fairly straightforward. Going for the bishop pair and taking that as compensation for the pawn that we've lost. We still do have some queenside pressure, but now we are not crashing through as easily. So yeah, I should probably just go bishop g3. That's what I expected. And that's where, I mean, this is where my preparation, and the knight h5 was the last move that I'd looked at. But he played knight e2. I thought it was quite strange, but okay. Knight e2 is not too bad. You aim to take back with the knight, right? So I took on f4, but then he took back with the pawn instead, which I think was, I mean, there are structures where you take back like this, you get double pawns, but the point is that they give you excellent control of this square usually on e5. But here is strange because he doesn't really have any piece that's going to make use of e5. I mean, none of his, the knight is going to take forever to try and get it. I don't even see a route, maybe like this. And then this knight will also probably take like 3 moves together. So The square e5 isn't too relevant as it is, so I didn't think here the idea was so strong. But okay, it is an idea, and he went for it. And here I played queen c7. He played knight d2. I played b6. He took on b6, and my queen took on b6. And if you look at my last two moves, they look a little weird because my queen was on d8. I played queen c7. Then I played b6. Then I played queen b6. So it looks like I wasted a move with my queen, right? Because from here, if I wanted to play b6, why didn't I just go b6? And that's really what you want to do. The point is that you still want to attack the structure. But the weakest pawn in this structure is actually this pawn on b4. Right? This pawn on c5 is actually quite strong. And you don't have as many attackers on it. But you have 1, 2, 3 attackers already on that pawn on b4. So you want to basically expose that pawn, right, to the attack by this dark square bishop. And that's the point of the move b6. So that after he takes back and we go to the end of that line, yeah, now all your pieces are showing their might, even the queen to this bishop on that point of b4. And that's where you're going to win your pawn back. But the problem with playing b6 immediately in this position was I noticed that he had this move bishop c6, where after I take back, he plays b5, where now that weak pawn I was targeting, he's moved it also with tempo, and this position is completely win. After my bishop draws back, someone goes c6 and I lose. So I had to start with queen c7, and then after knight e2, now I played b6. And now the point is that if he's to take, now I take back with the queen, and he doesn't have the move b5. So that was the key difference. So after queen d7, knight d2, b6 takes. Now he has a problem that he has to resolve on the b4 pawn. And basically, either he takes on c6 or he does what he did in the game, which is to take on a5. They are both like fairly equal, I think. So he took on a5. And then my rook took back. So now you have this position. You're still sort of in the opening, but out of the opening. Where as black I'm a pawn down, but I have quite excellent compensation. In that these two pawns are both quite weak. And I don't see how he maintains both of them, right? He probably loses one of them. And then you will get a middle game to late end game where material is equal and he still has one weak pawn to deal with. So it's a very interesting kind of idea and kind of structure. And I'd prepared for this tournament to play the Benko. And you get a lot of structures over there from the Benko Gambit where you are down material and you have like counterplay on the queen side like this. So during my preparation, I felt structures like this would be quite comfortable for me to play. So here he took on c6 and offering this queen trade. My queen took back and he played queen b8. And this was a very important crossroads. I'm down a pawn. And so it feels very natural to play bishop c8 because, I mean, you probably don't want to play queen c8. Sorry. And exchange queens like this in a position where you are down a pawn heading into an endgame, right? And so probably you prefer bishop c8. But I played queen c8. Both moves are okay. Both moves are quite good. Staying in the middle game like this is also good for black. You'll be chasing that queen away shortly. You'll be castling and you still have excellent pressure here on the queen side. But I went for queen c8 because I actually was not afraid of the endgame. And this was mostly due to my preparation, which is one of the benefits of preparation that perhaps isn't too often emphasized. Rather than just memorizing moves, the point is to understand the middle games that you're going to play. And so although I was out of prep very early on after the knight h5 move, I looked at many positions like this, and in the middle game I knew that even down a pawn, the computer assesses a lot of these positions as even being better for black because you have excellent compensation with this bishop pair, and these two pawns are also very, very weak. So these bishops are going to be very active on these diagonals. And you can imagine after castling, if there's another rook here, I mean, all your pieces look beautiful and they have targets. Whereas his pieces, you can't really say the same thing for. So because I knew this, I knew that going for queen c8 would be perfectly okay for me. And at the very least, I would get the pawn back and would have very, very nice chances. So I wasn't afraid going for this endgame a pawn down. And after bishop takes, he castled. I developed my bishop to a6, pinning the knight to his rook, basically forcing his next move as rook fe1. And then I developed my other bishop to a3. A very dangerous square. The point being that you are constantly threatening this move bishop b2, which forks these two pieces, the rook and then a pawn that is quite weak. So you can imagine a sequence like you take here, and then you play here, and then you take here. I mean, it's something that he has to think about. The other thing is that it always controls the c1 square, and so he doesn't easily defend the c pawn, right? Because my next move is I'm going to castle, I'm going to put the rook on the c file, I threaten this pawn. And if you can't put the rook on the c file, it's going to become a little awkward to defend that pawn as well. So the bishop on a3 I thought was very clever. So he started with rook b1 just to take away that idea of me playing rook b2. Now castles for me is forced, of course. I can't let his rook in. And then he played knight d4. Now his next few moves were based on a miscalculation, unfortunately. And his idea was that he's going to play knight d4, and my move is rook c8, of course. And he thought he's going to play f5. I mean, this is all what he did. And the point of f5 is that he's targeting my pawn here on e6 that's supposedly weak. And if I'm to take, he's going to take back with the knight, and he's going to be threatening knight e7 with a fork, and he's going to open up this file for his rook, and he's going to isolate my d pawn, and he's going to have counterplay. Unfortunately, it was based on a huge miscalculation. Like I mentioned, he probably wasn't in great form in this tournament, and so he simply missed that after e takes f5 and knight takes f5, and hopefully you didn't miss this as well. That I have bishop d3. I mean, simply forking these two pieces. And again, it's one of the dangers of such a position where I have the bishop pair, and I mean, they are very strong on an open board like this. So you might miss little things like this. The second thing he probably also missed was that knight e7 is actually protected by my other bishop on a3. So he actually didn't have any threats at all. So after bishop d3, realized he was dropping material. He played knight e3. I took on b1, and then the rook took back. I took on c3. Note he doesn't have any back rank because I have bishop f8 protecting. He played knight b3, hitting my other rook. I played the rook to b5, and then he played rook d1. And now we have this middle game position. I'm up an exchange for nothing. He doesn't really have anything for the exchange. The pawns are equal. But I have a pawn here on d5 that is doomed, right? He's already attacked twice, defended only once, and there isn't any reasonable way that I can add to the defense of this pawn. It's on a light square, so my bishop cannot protect it, and this rook has no squares. So I'm going to drop at least one pawn back. So although it is winning, it's not too simple actually. Still need a bit of finesse to win this position. So I played king f8. My idea is that okay, I cannot defend this pawn. But I'm looking to get my rooks in, and especially I want to get this rook here onto c2, where it can laser beam the second rank and then also take this pawn on a2 at some point. So although he's going to win this pawn, whenever it is that he takes, right, like if he takes with the knight, I get to go rook c2 immediately. And if he takes with the rook, then we will exchange a pair of rooks, and then I'll still go to c2. And I like my chances in this kind of endgame. At least once he has no more passed pawns on the other side of the board, I'll be able to show the full brunt of my extra material here on the king side. After king f8, he decided against taking the pawn. So he decided to play g3 and maintain the tension a little bit more. Like I said, my pawn isn't really going anywhere. He doesn't have to rush to take the pawn and give me more activity for my pieces. And so here I played what I thought was a clever move. I played rook c8. And the point of rook c8 is if you give me another turn, I am going to put my rook on the d file, and I'm going to protect my pawn, and you are not going to win the pawn back. That's, I mean, it's very straightforward. I'm going to play rook d8. And so I'm basically urging you to take the pawn right now. And when you take it, rather than going here and try to pin, there wasn't really anything that came out of that pin, I think. I rather just go right all the way back to c2, because now your knight has moved, and you're giving me the chance to come to the second rank like I wanted to all that time. So I mean, the last two moves kind of look a little funny. So after g3, rook c8, as if the rook were going somewhere, but then just comes all the way back to c2, and I've gained access to the rank that I want to. And here he played king g2, and And so of course I took on a2. And if you agreed with that move, I hope you didn't miss knight c3, where he forks my rooks and I lose my advantage. I mean, this is just completely equal now. So yeah, king g2, I mean, set a little trouble, but fairly obvious, of course. But then again, I can't take the pawn as yet because of the move knight c3. So I moved my other rook back to b8. Now I am threatening to take the pawn. And so he plays rook d2 to protect it. But this now forces us to go into an endgame where I'm just completely winning. I trade off these two pieces. Then I come to the d file with my rook, pretending that I'm forking these two pieces, but he does have knight c4 when he hits my bishop. And so I traded the bishops. I played rook a5, forcibly winning that pawn back. And we have this endgame where it's a 3-on-3, a rook versus knight. It's completely winning, of course. It still needed a bit of technique, but from here it was actually quite simple. It wasn't easy for him to defend, and so he crumbled quite shortly. So he went h4. I played h5 just to gain space on the king side. The king started advancing. My king started advancing. He put his knight on e5. I put my king on e6. The knight came back to d3. I played g6. The knight came to f4 with check. My king came up to f5, and the knight dropped to g2. Now, when you are fighting against knights, of course, the theory goes that they are very strong on outpost squares. So you want to take away those advanced protected squares away from them. So squares like this one, you want to try and protect and control them with your pawns, right? So I was going to play for this kind of structure where I have my pawns here, and you realize the knight has neither of those two squares. So I started with f6. Then he put his knight on e3 instead. Came with check, so my king dropped to e5, then knight g2. And he's trying to pretend like he has some sort of my light just went out. He has some sort of outpost, some sort of fortress here with the knight shuffling along these two squares, but it doesn't work, not even close. After rook a3, the knight came to a3, and I went g5. He dropped back with his king to g2, and I play my king up to e4. Here the engine points out that simply snapping here on e3 is actually winning, but yeah, and I guess it's actually not too difficult. But the point is that you don't go king e4. And you can try and pause the video and try and figure out why to play here, and I think draw, maybe even win. Okay, I'll tell you now. So the move is g4. It's a very famous kind of breakthrough idea where you're going to get a pass pawn with one of these two pawns, right? If you take here, and you have a pass pawn. And if he doesn't take, I mean, you're going to take here and you have a pass pawn. So it's an if he takes here, you push. So after takes, you start with the move g4, and eventually you are going to win tempo on this king, and you're going to win this pawn in the game. Yeah, but it takes a fair bit of bravery to see all of that from this position and go for that. And besides, the position was still easily winning anyway. So I just went king e4. His knight came to c4. Now the knight is kind of running out of squares because I was threatening to take it now here on e3. So it came to c4. My rook hit it on c3. And here I saw a very funny sequence, which started with knight d6, which he played. My king comes to e5. And you might get carried away, and I mean, because you need the tempo, right? If you give me back tempo, if you place something, then I'm going to take here on h5. And after you take back, I'm going to just bring my king in here. And my rook cuts off your king, so you're going to drop a pawn. And so you might feel the need to keep checking my king, but the problem is knight f7. I calculated a fairly long sequence. I think I'll still remember. That's just meant that he'd lost the knight by force, and I think it started with me just approaching the knight. And then if you keep on checking, I come here, and my rook takes away the square, so you have to go here. And here you realize you have a problem. Your knight is actually running out of squares and has only one square left. So my king just calmly approaches your knight. And eventually you're going to have to go to a5, right? So, I mean, you can go there immediately. And the problem here is that it's now in an actual box where the only square left is here, and you're going to play this move next. And the knight has no squares. So you're going to come here and you're going to win the knight, and he can do absolutely nothing about it. So that was kind of a funny sequence that I saw from here. So when he started checking, I thought maybe I was going to walk into that. But maybe he saw it too. Here he went knight e8 instead. But yeah, like I mentioned, it's still completely winning. You simply take on h4, which I did. And if he took back, I was just going to match my king in and take that pawn. So he played knight g7. to target my weak pawn instead. I took on g3, the pawn took back. I played rook c4. I mean, now I can't protect my pawn any longer. So he took on h5. I brought my king in. He played king f3. My king hit the knight, forcing the knight to go to f4. Then I checked his king. Because the king is protecting this square, this pawn, the king cannot walk forward. So he went back to f2. Then my king came forward to g4, exposing the fact that this pawn is very badly defended. And if you try something like this, I'm just going to pin the knight and I'm taking it off next, and that's a winning king and pawn ending. So here he didn't really have a good way to defend, so he went knight d5, just setting a small trap, which of course I completely ignored. I took the pawn, and again, if you agreed with that move, I hope you didn't miss that. Knight takes on f6 check would be a completely drawn endgame. Rook against knight with no pawns, it's just drawn, except in very specific situations that don't exist here. So the key here was to start with this move, rook f3 check, checking the king, but also defending this pawn, so that if he goes this way, then we just take the pawn with our king and the pawn is protected. And if he goes that way to f2 like he did in the game, then I take the pawn with check, and I can come back and protect my pawn on f6. So this was the game continuation. The rook dropped back to f4. Of course, he can't take because it's a winning king and pawn endgame. So the knight checked me somewhere. I played king g5. The king pretended I was going up. I just moved the rook away, and now I'm just threatening to start pushing. The king came to f3. I pinned his knight. The king came to e4. And now if I take the knight, is it a winning king and pawn endgame or not? This is a kind of, I mean, it's a little endgame knowledge, but it helps you a lot in these practical positions. So yeah, it is completely winning. So I took, and then king g4, king e2, king f4, king f2. And of course, the point is that in positions like this where he gets the opposition, I have a move with my extra pawn, and then he has to give up the opposition, and it's completely winning. So he resigned in this position. So it was a nice game. I thought it was very nice that I got a lot of my preparation on the board. And I mean, my understanding of the positions that I prepared helped me in the decision making in the game, and in the end they did pay off. So I was happy about that. I was also happy, of course, that my game against the highest rated opponent I'd ever played ended in a win. Although he wasn't really in great form, we'll still take all the W's we get, of course, especially with the black pieces. The tournament itself, though, didn't go that greatly. I'll pull up the standings. At the end, I tied for the 5th position, in a big tie for 5th there, with 5.5 points out of 9. I started fairly well, as you can see in my games here. Started with 2.5 points out of the first 3 games, but then the middle 3 games I collapsed and lost every single one of them. Some of them very badly. One was fair. The round 4 was a fair loss, but the round 5 and 6 were actually quite bad. But then fortunately I managed to end on a good note in the last 3 rounds with 3 wins. That's just helped me tie for 5th and get a tiny prize money and also some rating points. So it wasn't the worst tournament ever, but yeah, I definitely wasn't even close to good. I was quite disappointed, but it's the kind of experience I think I need, and I definitely took a lot of lessons from it. So thank you very much for tuning in as always. I hope you enjoyed this game as I did. And we'll be looking to come your way with more classical chess analysis as soon as I can get another tournament to play in. Enjoy your chess. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, comment. See you later.